Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Spring of 2022 SNATS Chat. If this is your first time joining us for a SNATS Chat, thank you for being here. We're so glad to have you here for this conversation. My name is Errik Hood, and 5 or 6 years ago, I started these SNATS Chats building off the model of success that NATS has had with our NATS Chat series, but trying to find topics that we could aim towards current college students and early career voice teachers, trying to find topics and a discussion that really is catered specifically to that group. And we've had a ton of wonderful guests and great conversations about voice science, pedagogy, performance anxiety, coping with the pandemic. We've had a lot of topics, but our topic this evening is more of a discussion about how we can build successful SNATS chapters in college campuses, but also in the community. So I brought together a great group of panelists today. I'm really excited to have a conversation with them. But I wanted to go over a few things before I introduce our guests. The first being, we really want this to be a conversation not just between myself and the panelists, but all of you as well. So please feel encouraged. I have the chat open, so please feel free to put questions you have in the chat. You can also let me know if you'd like to just be promoted to a panelist, turn your camera on, and ask a question of our guests in person with the camera on and engage in the conversation with us that way too. So you can send us your questions in the chat, or you can let me know if you'd like to turn your camera on and join the conversation. So please feel encouraged to do either one of those. Before I introduce our guests, I also want to thank, we have a sponsor for our SNATS Chat for the first time, which is very exciting. Our sponsor is Ruth Ellis with the Vocal Instructor Academy. I'm going to drop a link for this program in the chat and just share a little blurb from Ruth here for all of us. Yeah, so here's the link in the chat to everyone. So from Ruth, she says, the sad truth is that most music degrees don't prepare us to make a living, leaving students scrambling to figure it out on their own. So the Vocal Instructor Academy bridges that gap by offering both singer-specific business instruction and cross-training pedagogy. Dr. Ruth Ellis finds this topic so important, and she finds it so important to aid her young colleagues. She is willing to present a free seminar on this topic to your SNATS chapter if you'd like to contact her to set that up. So I'm going to drop her email address in the chat as well, and we'll put these links in the YouTube caption when we post the recording after the fact as well. So that link is there, and Ruth's email address is there. So if you're interested in finding out more about our sponsor, you can check out that link or email Ruth directly. So with that being said, I'm really excited to introduce our guest this evening. First, we have Dr. Nick Perna, who is Associate Professor of Voice and Voice Pedagogy at Mississippi College, and who this summer will be joining the NATS board as the Vice President for Outreach. And that is the national officer who oversees SNATS. So we're really excited to have Nick with us. We also have my good friend and colleague, Dr. John Moniz, who is Associate Director of Vocal Performance and Coordinator of Vocal Pedagogy at NYU Steinhardt, and also is the chapter advisor for the SNATS chapter at NYU. And we have two of the officers from that chapter with us as well, Chris Sanders, who is the president, and Julia Cohen, who is the vice president, and they are both Masters of Music Theater, and Advanced Pedagogy Certificate students here at NYU Steinhardt. So welcome, all of you. So glad to have you here for this conversation. Really excited to dig in. So with that being said, I think we should just dig in and talk about what is a SNATS chapter and how do we start one? So Nick, can you talk a little bit about what's the process for starting a SNATS chapter if you don't have one at your college currently?
Well, the process is actually quite simple. All you need is five people who are students who would like to start a chapter and an advisor who is a NATS member in good standing. Although I would actually put a caveat on even the idea that you said, in so much as you don't need to even be at a university. All you need is 5 students and a NATS member who would like to organize a student NATS chapter, and you can do so. It does not have to be tied to an academic institution. It can be, obviously. Many, I would say the majority of our chapters are, but all you do is have your 5 individuals and your advisor and contact VP Outreach. And the email address for VP of Outreach is I just had it pulled up. I was right, vpoutreach@nats.org, which if you email that email address in the next few months, it will still be Kimberly James, who is our current VP for Outreach. And then sometime over the summer, that will transition to me. So that is how you go about getting it officially on the books.
Excellent, and thanks, Nick, for reminding us that yes, while many of our SNATS chapters are associated with the university, it can just be in a community, right? Sometimes you have students at university programs where there isn't a SNATS chapter, and they come together to form a group, and that also helps create cooperation and collaboration in different universities, different communities. So that's an important option. I'm really glad you reminded us of that. So Justin, when you got to NYU Steinhardt, there wasn't an active SNATS chapter. So what made you decide to start one? What did you think the benefits would be? What was that process like for you?
Well, initially, my thought on this was we have a pedagogy program, but we don't have a SNATS chapter. So that was the first thought. But then upon thinking about it further, there's really a need. And I think for a lot of folks who are operating at institutions that don't offer a pedagogy component, what we've found here is that pedagogy is only one small piece of the puzzle in terms of student engagement. I think the function of the chapter will change, perhaps depending upon the makeup of the community it serves. But the thing that's been really rewarding for us is that the chapter has been able to provide a supplement to departmental programming. And NYU, we've got a pretty robust department offering, but we also have a lot of students. So the cool thing is that this chapter has provided additional opportunities to those students. We've been able to bring in guest clinicians and lecturers, allowing the students to interface and to even participate in masterclass settings. So it's really been a wonderful, I think, addition, an additional offering for the community to really engage in a different way. I think folks maybe will assume at first that perhaps this is really geared to those who want to teach voice, but I think it's a real opportunity to just engage as singers, right, in what we do. And of course, if that part of the conversation is pedagogic application, then great. But also too, if it's just to think about what we do as individuals and how we put ourselves together, there's certainly something to be said about that, right? First and foremost. So I think it's a really an interesting thing to consider. And I would encourage those folks who may be out there who don't have perhaps a pedagogy program to not let that discourage them, because I do think that many of our students have been really excited who have not been pedagogy students to jump in and to be involved in what we do and what we offer. And it's simply another opportunity, another vehicle to make those opportunities possible for students.
Yeah, I can attest to that too. Having arrived at NYU a year after you, Justin, and seeing the SNATS chapter already in high gear, and seeing, just like you said, seeing opportunities for students to get more involved, seeing students connect with young professionals as singers, as voice teachers, as coaches, just providing that networking connection has been really cool to watch as well. So yeah, I agree. It doesn't have to be necessarily because I intend to be a full-time voice teacher right after I finish my academic program. All kinds of benefits outside of that. So speaking of some of those benefits for students, Chris, Julia, do you want to jump in and share a little bit about what those benefits have been for you and some of your colleagues at NYU?
Yeah, I think it's just been a great way to interact and network with, not just more people within the department, but people actively working in the industry as well, which I think is kind of the goal, especially for a lot of us who are in graduate school, and our next step is really going out and having to be in the world and to be able to create those connections before we make that step. I think is really important, really beneficial for us as people on the executive board, and then for our students at the same time, and also to have the ability to connect with people on a broad range in terms of the kinds of things that they specialize in. We've had this semester, we've had someone come in, then their whole conversation was about diction. We've had someone come in and did a lot of focus on acting the song, which I think was really beneficial to a lot of us who are primarily focused on the voice and studying the voice. So I think just getting a wide range of interaction with people who specialize in different areas throughout has been really, really important.
And I guess I would say, just to add on to that, one thing I think being on the board that can be really helpful is we really learn the inner works of an organization, which you don't always realize until you're part of that. And we've learned a lot just as students and as teachers and now as leaders. And that's important as many of us have jobs outside of NYU or are applying for jobs outside of NYU. And I think our conversation around organizations and jobs, we have more experience because we understand it more. And that has been just incredibly beneficial in my experience, and I think with our colleagues as well.
That's fantastic. I think those are great points. And something I thought was really cool about what Chris said, and Nick, Justin, maybe you'll agree, because I think all three of us teach courses in voice pedagogy. There's so much we want to communicate to this next generation of voice teachers, and only so much time to communicate everything. And a lot of times, especially when we're in early career voice teaching, we're not just teaching technique. We're helping with diction and pronunciation. We're helping with acting the song. We want to stay within our scope of practice, but we also want to help our voice students be able to create complete performances. And so we don't always have time to work those into the formal curriculum of a pedagogy course, but if we can work those into the activities of a SNATS chapter, we can really create, more prepared singers and teachers. So Nick, I don't know, in your courses in Mississippi, do you have that issue? Do you ever think, do you feel like you have plenty of time to teach everything you want to teach all the time?
No. I mean, right. And it also depends on whether we're talking. I have the luxury that at the graduate level, I have my students for 5 different classes, so it's a little bit different. The undergrad, there's not enough time to do it all. But I mean, but I mean, is there enough time in our voice lessons to do it? I mean, just as voice teachers, I mean, there's always the next thing. I mean, that's just part. But if I could just respond to something Julia and Chris just shared. I think it was you, Julia, who hit on the idea that being involved kind of gives you the vision of like what it's really like to be involved in an organization. And I think that was really beautiful, because one of the things that I think is important about SNATS is that it starts to prepare our students. Now, this is my perspective as a member, as an officer. It starts to prepare our students with the idea of service to an organization. And if you want to get the most out of an organization, the best way to do that is by being involved and serving the organization in an appropriate capacity, of course, because we all have all our other junk we got going on. But I think that is exactly right, because it gives you a perspective on, like, for example, sometimes you'll hear people complain about any organization, whatever it is, Well, if you want to complain about it, get involved and change it. Anyway, I thought that was really great.
I agree completely. Yeah, the best way to affect change is from the inside, right? And if you're a part of it, you're volunteering, you're connecting, you're going to be able to make those impacts more readily. So yes, that's a fantastic point, Julia and Nick. Thank you so much for that. This actually kind of connects really well to the next topic I wanted to talk about, which is one of the things I love about SNATS. It's not just a club for students, right? It is an organization run by students, organized by students. It's meant to be a student-led organization. And so one of the things I think that's fantastic is that we are empowering students when we do that. We organize a chapter. So Justin, as the advisor for the NYU chapter, can you talk a little bit about how did you work with students to create this leadership structure? How did you go about setting the first group of officers? We've got a lot of people who responded to our Google form who are talking about wanting to either revitalize an inactive chapter or start a new one. So I think this is an important step, deciding how these chapters are going to be run. So can you talk a little bit about how you work with students to do that?
Yeah, happy to. Well, I think first of all, it's about, polling the population and seeing if there's interest. Oftentimes the interest is just based on what they know about an organization. So it was first sharing the benefits of having an organization like this on campus. I think one of the big things too is emphasizing the ability to network with those outside, NYU and to provide sort of the benefits and present them to students so they could sort of see, okay, if I'm going to invest my time in this endeavor, what's sort of in it for me, right? What could I walk away with, so to speak, aside from perhaps a title on the executive board. But how we did it initially is, we I consulted with my colleagues in terms of bringing forth a group of students who expressed interest and who I thought would be appropriate for some of these roles. And we were able to ask for a short statement from each of them just on, hey, send us a paragraph in terms of why you might want to be involved. And that's how we came up with our initial e-board. We reviewed these submissions, these statements, and we decided perhaps who would be most appropriately served for which roles. And then that's how we created the initial e-board. Beyond that, it's a matter of course, interest. I know that we're looking at the possibility of elections as we move forward and we continue to build the size of the group. But one of the things that I'm always concerned with too is there going to be a full turnover, or are we going to have some common denominator, right, in the next e-board, so we have an ability to rely on institutional knowledge and somebody to help provide policies and procedures and help to guide the new folks coming on. So at least initially, it was sort of self-nominations and then faculty review, which I thought was really helpful in a way to keep it diplomatic, if you will. And moving forward, we've begun to investigate other ideas, but that's how we got it off the ground.
One thing I love about what you're saying there, Justin, is that if you're getting statements from these folks who want to be leaders and involved, you can also get a sense for what direction this group wants to take, just from the very outset. Before you even have a meeting, you kind of have a feeling for what people's goals are, what they want to get from the chapter, which makes it a lot easier. So that's fantastic. Chris, Julia, can you talk a little bit about what drew you to a leadership position? I know we talked a little bit about this, seeing the behind the scenes of the organization and some of the networking, but can you talk a little bit more about making this decision, the time commitment it's been? We've had a lot of people on the Google form. They ask questions because I think Justin alluded to this a little bit. We're all looking for ways to be involved. We're all looking ways to bolster our resume and our CV. But I think some people can be a little reticent to get involved because they worry the time commitment might be too much. So can you just talk a little bit about that aspect as well?
Yeah, I'll go real quick, and then I know Chris
Great.
has some things to say on this one. So we were talking about time commitment together today when we were thinking about our experience with SNATS, and it really is dependent on the event. If we have an event coming up, that is going to increase our time commitment. But we have kind of set in stone things that we like to do. We like to have a monthly meeting with our e-board, things like that. And depending on your role, you might have some time commitment. But I would say there's weeks where we do very little. And then there's weeks where, Chris and I might spend an hour or two on something, depending on what it is. I think it is a completely manageable time commitment. But what gets tricky is if we're delegating things correctly or not. And that's one thing we're really trying to work on. I know Chris probably wants to talk about that.
Yeah, that was kind of an ongoing conversation Julia and I have had throughout a lot of the year. It's one of the kind of the big reasons I wanted to sign on for the e-board when I got into NYU. I actually started last year as the music events coordinator for our chapter and then moved into president for this year. And I initially wanted to dive in as music events coordinator because I had done a similar job when I worked as an apprentice for Cleveland Playhouse after I left undergrad, and I really enjoyed that process of creating events and working with the talent to interact with the community and with students. And so I enjoyed bringing that similar job to the SNATS chapter. And then when the opportunity came up to sign on as president, I was excited by the idea. And I think something that Julia brought up, delegating, has been a fun thing to learn how to do, especially as president. And being someone who is a perfectionist and someone who is very hands-on, and as Julia can probably tell you, sometimes she just has to be like, Chris, let me do that. It's fine. It'll happen. And so being able to relinquish control is something that I have learned about a lot as being on the executive board. which I think is kind of a big thing of like why would you want to be on the executive board? And I think it's taught me a lot, especially as someone who's training to be a teacher. You have to learn how to delegate. You can't do it all. And I think that is a big lesson that I've had to learn, and that SNATS has kind of taught me throughout the process, because there are only so many hours in the day. And when you're, a grad student and also running your voice student and teaching, or voice studio and teaching non-majors and all of that, and then also doing SNATS, it's sometimes you just have to learn when to ask for help. And that's a big thing that I've learned from doing this position.
I think that's fantastic. And I think, one of the things I love about a degree in vocal performance is that, you can take the knowledge you learned in that degree and apply it to any number of careers. It doesn't have to be voice teacher, professional singer, or nothing, right? And the skills you learn from organizing a chapter or organizing these kinds of events, working together, you can use those skills in any number of careers that this degree can help prepare you for. So I think that's really important too. Nick, Justin, anything either of you want to say, having advised SNATS chapters in the past, about the time commitment or anything you'd like to share in that regard?
It's a time commitment for the advisor too. Through all this, because there are so many things behind the scenes that have to do with, institutions and policies and procedures for events, bookings. Depending on your institution, it may not be something that students can do. Also too, in the COVID era, getting visitors cleared for campus access and things like that. So there are a lot of things that I think, you might consider, but I will say it's been really rewarding, because, for our students to be able to do something that's fully created and implemented by them and their vision. I mean, sure, I advise and serve in an advisory capacity as we go through this, but the season, which I know they'll share soon, was really a result of their vision. And I think that's one of the most remarkable things, because, as artists, we do so many things aside from just sing and perform, and so these skills that are developed, and that are cultivated through these roles, these leadership roles on the e-board especially, are so invaluable. And really parallel what one might do as an administrator of a program, a faculty member, perhaps working in a nonprofit. There are so many skills that are transferable. And I think it's been a real thrill for me to see the students come up with the vision and then really execute it, and then just be able to be a sounding board as they've gone through that process.
Yeah, well, it sounds to me like what everyone's saying is that it is a time commitment, and it's something that we need to take seriously if it's an undertaking we're looking at, but that it's manageable, and that the more people that you have actively involved, the more manageable it is for everyone involved, right, to share the load. So I think that's an argument for sharing the load across an e-board, rather than asking one student to do everything as president. And that kind of leads us to one of our audience questions. Carter asks, what are all of the officer positions at NYU SNATS Chapter, and how have they helped serve your chapter for event planning and such? So I know we have a little discussion planned for event planning in just a few moments, but maybe you could talk about what specific officers there are on the NYU SNATS e-board, and kind of what their role is for the chapter.
Yeah, I'll jump in and take it away from there. So we have a president, vice president, a secretary, a treasurer, a music events coordinator, and then also a social media person / historian in our chapter. It's been funny. This question gets brought up because we've been going through the process right now of getting our new executive board put together for next year. And we had a nice long, probably like an hour and a half discussion, the current executive board, of being like, what really are everyone's duties? Because I feel like this year, especially as we've done a lot of events this year, which has been wonderful. But it's been kind of a learn as we go process, and kind of an all hands on deck, and everyone's just kind of done as much as they can when they've been able to do it, and helped each other throughout it. So to have to sit down and really like figure out, okay, what can everyone actually take charge of in their own time? I feel like I've kind of stepped into this role of just kind of giving like last looks at a lot of things, I guess you could say. I know Julia has been really wonderful throughout the past year as vice president of kind of drafting most of the announcements and emails that have gone out to the department when we have events happening, or interacting with the different technicians we have coming in, and then sending those to me just to like glance over and then getting them out to the community. Julia also had a fantastic idea when we were trying to come up with ways to find engagement within our department of every time we had a masterclass or a workshop happening, of taking the time to email every single voice teacher that we have within the department separately, and ask them to reach out to their separate studios about our events, which really helped boost engagement. And so Julia kind of took that on in her role as vice president, which was wonderful. Our secretary really taking charge of keeping track of everything, which can be hard. We get 10,000 emails a day. And so keeping us on track of deadlines and due dates, and GSO at NYU, who funds us for the events that we're able to do now throughout this past year. We have, meetings we have to attend monthly for them. And so our secretary has been really great about being involved in those when, Julia and I can't be there as a representative for our chapter. Yeah, Julia, do you want to jump in? I don't want to take up all the time.
Yeah, no, I think what Chris is saying is we did a lot of tag teaming this year, and that was great, and I think necessary sometimes. But our goal for next year, as Chris is still on the board, but everybody else, we're gone, is to really make it that everybody feels like they have a place and that it's not overwhelming and those types of things. And so one thing that we were talking about is with our treasurer, what else can our treasurer do? Because sometimes that's a very limiting. Luckily, with GSO, we get funding this past year, which we didn't have 2 years ago. So that's been incredible. Oh gosh, sorry, New York City apartment. Oh my goodness. But the treasurer and the secretary have been working together recently, and that has been really helpful. And then actually our treasurer and we work together. We're having an event in like a week or two at Juries, and we had to pick out food. So Chris and Dr. Moniz have been involved, but then the treasurer and we like solidified how much everything costs and what would make sense. So kind of little things like that where we can work with the treasurer to make them help them be more involved, because our treasurer is like, what else can I do? So finding that, and then I would say our events coordinator really being someone who can reach out to some of the people we want to network to. Occasionally though, if we have a connection with someone, it might be Chris reaching out because he has that connection, but really giving them the opportunity to be like, and connect with our events coordinator as we make the plan.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's excellent. And so we're really getting a sense for how, when the load is shared, how it's much more manageable, and universities and communities can both be looking for opportunities to start these chapters if you have groups who are willing to pitch in and share the load. So thanks for that question, Carter. So now we're getting into the real meat of the conversation of our Google form responses. Over 90% of them really wanted us to focus especially on event planning for chapters and getting more students involved. So first, Chris, Julia, you guys were already starting to talk about this a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about the process of planning the event? How do you publicize them? Please share with us some of that information.
Yeah, it has definitely been a process. It's a conversation Julia and I have had. I've had it with Dr. Moniz a lot about getting involvement and ways to go about doing that. A lot of it's been, last year, I know a lot of the events that we had were really able to happen because of connections that a lot of us had with different people out in the community and people who volunteered their time, which was so incredibly wonderful. A lot of Dr. Moniz's colleagues that came in and volunteered their time to be able to work with our students, which was really great. And so it really starts with a lot of us just sitting in a room together and brainstorming and figuring out what do we think the need is currently, and what are students wanting to gain from something. I feel like you're not really going to get involvement from people if they don't feel like they're getting something out of it. So even though it may seem something that's interesting to you, if they're not finding it interesting or it's not something they feel like they're not currently getting, chances are they're probably not going to attend. I think I remember at the beginning of the semester, I think Julia put together kind of a form on social media for people to submit responses to us of what they were looking for in terms of events from us, which was really helpful. And then beyond that, once we kind of get an outline of what we think we want, it's connecting with, our current music events coordinator, Errik Penrod, and I working together to think about people we might be able to bring in and emailing with Dr. Moniz and saying, like, do we know anyone that might be willing to come in and volunteer their time, especially last year and this year, now that we finally had funding through the university. Thank you to NYU GSO for that. So we were finally able to pay our artists and our technicians, which we should be doing. And so being able to kind of up the ante in terms of who we were reaching out to ask to come in. And that's kind of where it all starts from, and getting the idea. And then it's just about reaching out and putting out the asks as much as we can. And then when we get it solidified in terms of who we're going to have come in, social media has been our best friend throughout the past year, as with a lot of things. Julia, do you want to step in?
Before Julia,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask a question, Chris. One of the things you said, were you both, and Julia, please jump in about this also. Did you get the response you expected? Were the kinds of events that the students were looking for in line with what you anticipated, or were there some surprises? I asked, before we started the actual webinar, we were chatting a little before we started, and NYU has a pretty robust slate of offerings, and so some of us might think like, oh, what more could they want, or what needs are not being met, but did you find it surprising, or did you find it kind of aligned with what you expected?
So I would say a few things that, maybe a little. Okay. So we had some responses that were heavy with like NYU adjuncts, like our teachers in the PED program being like, I want someone to continue our conversations, or like coffee chat conversations of let's talk technique. And so in a way, you could be surprised because we're all in PED courses, but also as we mentioned, it's how you can't teach everything in one course. These conversations need to continue. So we did a lot of teaching-based chats 2 years ago. And with our technicians this year, we were able to continue that. But we had a lot of performance-based things this year. But in NYU, we're a program of musical theater and classical and contemporary voice. So one thing that we always have to make sure is, like Chris said, the needs of our students, and that spans many genres. So I think for us, it can be surprising because NYU does have, as a department, so much to offer. But like Dr. Moniz said, we have a lot of students. And because of that, you might find, oh, they want more performance, but they want more performance. And
yeah. Oh, sorry. I think what was really surprising to me was the amount of non-pedagogy students at NYU that were so interested in the pedagogy side of things and wanted to know more about that and wanted to kind of get an insight on what we're doing every day in the classroom, but being able to get that through SNATS, which was really great, and I think was a great way for us to expand our outreach to the performance side of things and not just the pedagogy students, which I thought was really wonderful. And to Julia's point, we have such a wide range of what students at NYU are studying between contemporary, classical, musical theater, voice. It also gave us the challenge of having to delegate. We were only given so much money in terms of a budget from GSO this semester, or for this year. And so having to sit down and budget that out in terms of who we could bring in, and making sure that every single voice at NYU felt like they got represented in terms of the technicians that we were bringing in for them, which was a huge challenge, but I think a necessary one and a good one for us to have.
For
And
sure.
if I may
Please,
if I
Justin.
may offer a compliment to the executive board, one of the things I think that is so effective right now is the way in which you go about sharing the events and promoting the events. I know that we're going to come into that shortly, but it's sort of like running a business, right? We really are in an oversaturated market. There are so many Zoom events, there are so many on-campus events and clubs and organizations where people can easily decide how they're going to spend their time. But I think one of the things that you all have done so incredibly well is the brand of the organization, and it's something that we talk about a lot in pedagogy. But you all have run with that, and you've developed, I think, a product, if I could even say that has become so consistent and so enticing. And so when we see that logo pop up on the Instagram page, or pops up in an e-blast from the department administrator, it's like, oh, there's a certain quality that's to be expected because of the consistency with the way in which you present the organization. So I think that's a big part of it, because I mean, I know, I run a nonprofit as well, and we're always competing with other folks. And I just feel like you all do such a good job of that in terms of presenting the brand and allowing that consistency to follow through with everything you present, which is really fun and I think very exciting for the students.
And I can say from experience with the faculty as well, it's really cool to watch what the students are able to do. I asked, one of the reasons I asked that question is because I think it's easy to assume, because, oh, I'm a student in this program, I have a good sense for what all of my colleagues might be looking for. But I think I love that you polled the students to see what they were interested in, because it doesn't, it makes sense that there would be maybe some minor surprises or some things you hadn't thought of that come from the student body. So I just think it's great that you were really trying to consider every voice. And Chris, I love what you said about every voice in the program seeing themselves represented, right? And I think that's hugely important. So I really wanted to spotlight that. So Julia, I jumped in on what you were going to say earlier. I apologize.
No, you're great. This was just the process. So Chris had mentioned events solidified. Chris and Dr. Moniz, they've talked, it's solidified. So the next thing is, hopefully this is one of our new ones where we can start, having a budget and paying our artists. And so that would be something that Chris and Carissa, who is our wonderful treasurer, would be talking to GSO about and solidifying, which takes actually a lot of time. You have to really prepare. It's not something you can just be like, hey, GSO, we need this tomorrow. Something you have to prepare months, really, in advance. And so that's something that we have to submit every event to GSO. If it's not an event where we need money, we don't have to be as early. But if it's an event we need money, we need to be early.
Julia, can you let people know what GSO stands for, in case they're not sure?
Yeah, it's our graduate student organization. And so we have, as Chris said, there's meetings every month that we have to attend as a club. And so Chris and I have attended those. Our wonderful secretary, Savannah, has attended those. So we have to be represented there, and they're great. They provide resources about all different things. The last one I went to was all about inclusion, and it was really, really beneficial, something that we can pass along to our e-board as well as our students, our members, sorry. So that would be the next event, GSO. And then after that, our social media manager, which I actually was the social media my first year at with SNATS, but then the second year, it's kind of been a shared job between Chris and I'd say. Chris has done a lot of the amazing flyers, and then I try to post the more, but Chris posts also. It's kind of combined. But we have an incredible person who's going to be joining next year, and I think we'll kind of show you what these gorgeous posters are going to be like. Chris, you want to share those?
You think after this long on Zoom, I would know how to unmute myself. Yes, I'd be more than happy to. So I can take you just a quick look at kind of what they started as. We'll pull up Dr. Hood here. We'll show your flyer here. So kind of where we started from with these, and then what our new social media person, Kevin Gassio, is going to start doing. But so this is kind of where we began in terms of, can that be seen? Make sure. So this is kind of where it started, just in terms of a general idea for the announcement posters for all of our workshops and masterclasses, which really, it was just kind of like Photoshop and a prayer for me in terms of putting these together. I have an amazing partner who's a whiz with Photoshop who helped me kind of figure out the basic logistics in order to start putting these together and just getting a template, and then inserting the information as we went along. But what I'm actually really excited for, and I would love to share, I'll stop that and then share this new one, but our new social media person who's going to start with us next year put together this incredible image, just kind of showcasing all the events we went through throughout the past year, and giving a little like redesigned or a rebrand, if you will, in terms of SNATS moving forward for our chapter. And this year's been kind of a big, I don't know if Julia would agree, kind of a blur, I would say, in terms of how fast it's gone. And it wasn't until recently when I asked our new social media person, Kevin, if he would put together a little something for us about everything we've done over the past year. And he sent this back, and I just kind of sat back and I was like, wow, like we really did it. We like accomplished a lot. And it was really exciting to see. And just having these images like this to put out there on social media and also to send out to the department every time we've had an event, I think has really helped boost engagement in general, and has made people excited about what's happening. You can say a lot, but when you're able to put it onto paper like this, it kind of makes it really legitimate and real and exciting. So I feel very grateful, and that we've been able to do all of this over the past year, and I'm just excited for what we're going to be able to do in the year to come.
Yeah. So basically so this is like the form, this is our flyer that we create. And this flyer is created, and then after it is created, this is how we didn't always happen this year, but we tried to have it happen this way. And this is what it's going to happen in the future. But the vice president then will draft kind of our blurb that we send out to the administrative side at NYU, who will blast it to our whole department, which is pretty cool. And so that flyer is there. So vice president drafts, president approves and sends. So as Chris said, he always has that final look. And then that is sent to the department. And then the vice president, as Chris had mentioned, I'll send this event to every individual teacher, just as a reminder. If we have a deadline, like, hi, we have students, we need, students for this masterclass to submit by April 14th, I'll send it, 2 weeks in advance. And that has been really helpful. And then after that happens, the social media manager will post leading up to this event. So Chris, if you want to kind of share our social media, and that's basically how our events go.
Yeah, I can just do a quick screen share. So we've mainly been relying on Instagram up to now, which has seemed to be the most beneficial. We had talked about trying to put together a Facebook page as well, but kind of from the response we got from a lot of our students, Facebook wasn't really getting used as much. And so we decided to stick to just Instagram. We had briefly talked about maybe going towards Twitter as well, but quite honestly, I can't even figure out Twitter half the time myself. So I was not about to try and add that to the plate. But Instagram has been proved pretty successful. I'll just kind of share our page here thus far. Give us a follow if you want. But this is kind of where we've been at from here. We generally like to post announcements of every event, and then a little follow-up afterwards. So like we had Felicia Gavilanes came in and did an interpreting Italian repertoire masterclass with us, and then we just did a little follow-up image here from the Zoom workshop as a thank you to her. And that's kind of how we run it most of the time. And we also like to use the page to showcase our executive board, our amazing treasurer, Carissa, as you'll see here. She just had her graduate recital recently. So we like to use it as a place to showcase that as well. So yeah, that's mostly how we've been using social media.
Fantastic, excellent. So I love that you're really doing my job for me, Chris and Julia. I really appreciate it because that kind of brings us to our next. Oh, we have a question. Sorry. How has NYU SNATS mitigated member longevity with turnaround in students, especially graduate students, who are often only in their institutions for 2 years or less? What has been the most effective process in continuing recruitment and retaining active participation? So I have this kind of topic scheduled for a little later, but I think we can dig into it now because I think this is an important question that connects to what we're talking about now, right? If we're creating wonderful events, if we're getting students involved in these events, how do we continue that momentum when maybe some of the leaders graduate or when there's a lot of turnover every 2 years, especially a lot of leadership is graduate students? Julia, Chris, Justin, can you jump in and address that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I believe one of the big things in terms of engagement is being sure that the event is open to those who may not be members of the organization. It's a way by which to expose the community to what it is that we do. You know, we can talk about it for days, but if they can actually be a part of an event, you know, there have been students who have maybe participated in a master class who have really had a great experience, who may not have been involved in SNATS prior, but who now will return to a future event because of that positive experience that they had. So I think it's about really casting a wide net in terms of the events and the ways in which you open those events up to those who may not be, say, in a regular attendance, if you will. That's been a big part for us, from my perspective.
Great. Yeah, and Justin, I would assume as the advisor, you're kind of the fixture, right? The students come and go, but you're helping to facilitate that turnover, helping make sure that the e-board, I'm sure, is comprised of students who are maybe graduating, but also students who will be around, so that you have that overlap to help continue that continuity.
Yeah, that's a great point. And one of the things I said to the current e-board is that I wanted to be sure that heading into next year, we had at least one position that was held vacant so that the incoming students, graduate students, and also potentially undergraduates would have the opportunity to get involved. So again, that there can be a carryover, if you will, in terms of personnel. So we're not having to reinvent the wheel. And then the advisor is left to train everybody, basically relaunch the chapter. I mean, that's what happens if everybody goes off, you know? So it's a sustainability consideration, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah, it sounds like that's the kind of the concern of our question asker too, right? Which is how do we not have to reinvent the wheel every 2 years? So I love the idea of specifically and strategically organizing your e-board in a way where you have students who are going to carry on, right? So that there's more continuity. Chris, Julia, do you have anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big goal for Julia and I talked about this a lot as we've gone into choosing the new executive board for next year, um, is really wanting to get more undergrads involved because undergrads are around for a lot longer than us graduate students are. And, I thankfully am going to be in the program a little bit longer than the rest of my executive board, so I'm able to continue into next year. But if that had not been the case, all of us would be graduating this year. And so as we've gone through gauging interest, I actually got a lot of interest from what will now be the second year graduate students in the PED program wanting to be on the executive board next year, which was wonderful. But then when we kind of sat down with Dr. Moniz and talked about that, he was great about, kind of reminding us that we'll end up in the same position we are now come next year when all of us would be graduating. So making sure that there is space there for people who can keep it going, I think is really important. And I think a priority for us moving forward is to try and really boost undergraduate engagement because they just simply have more time to be involved, which I think is super useful.
Yeah, that's excellent. Fantastic. Julia, please.
Yeah, no, and I would just say also, I think as Dr. Moniz was saying that we're starting to have kind of this SNATS logo. We're getting a brand, right? And I think our hope is that the brand stays even past your involvement as a student at NYU. One thing that Chris had like the most amazing idea, we had a master class, and the way that we picked who got to sing there was to involve our old SNATS members who graduated to be the audition like panelists. And so they got the videos and they got to choose their top 3. And so that was somehow, that they were involved, even though they're not actively part of the organization anymore. And I think the more that we make it known that this commitment with SNATS is not short term, it can be a long term part of your life, I think is something that's going to be appealing. So that's something past not only we want undergrads, but we want the future, we want the post grad, we want everybody. So really having that continue, having someone who can be there in the turnover is important, but also showing that you will have opportunity post being involved as well.
I think that's great. Sorry, Dr. Hood. I just want to say I think Julia makes a great point, because I think the whole point in SNATS, outside of just creating opportunity for the students, outside of what NYU is bringing in, is to create a sense of community, a sense of family, and networking. And so creating those connections with each other, because beyond being in school, like, we are the people that we're going to work with in this industry, and continuing those relationships beyond our time at NYU, I think, is really important. And I think bringing in those, and I think it was actually Dr. Moniz who suggested us doing that kind of alumni team to choose our masterclass singers. I think just kind of instills that sense of continuing networking beyond their time within our program.
And it works. Due to that, I actually was able to, a job I just got teaching at a studio through someone who was in the organization before, I was able to reconnect with because of this. And then I was able to ask questions and get like a good, hey, look at Julia's application. So it works. It definitely works.
I think that's fantastic. I'm sure Nick, Justin, I'm sure you'd agree with me. Also when you're trying to strengthen your programs, your vocal performance programs, the best ambassadors are alumni, right? And so when you're maintaining those alumni connections, you're not only building the network for the students and the recent graduates, but you're also helping those alumni stay connected to their institution, and so being ambassadors for the program. And so I think that's hugely important. I'm sure you're making Nick and the rest of the exec board happy too, because I'm guessing if they're connected to the SNATS board, they're going to be more likely to stay connected to NATS and be actively involved in NATS after graduating too. So I think you're making Nick and the executive board for NATS, their job, easier too. So that's fantastic. Excellent. So I'm cognizant of our time. There's so many topics we wanted to talk to, but a lot of the topics we've kind of touched on peripherally through some of these questions. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the ways that Julia, Chris, you mentioned a little bit connecting with alumni. How can SNATS how can it serve students outside of our university, right? And so, Nick, I was hoping you would talk a little bit about the program with the NATS National Conference and how SNATS students can be involved with that.
Sure. Students can volunteer their time, and if they work 15 hours or more at National this summer in Chicago, they actually receive complimentary registration. And I don't know if you want to throw that link in the chat, or you want me to. You got it? So that is definitely one of the great pathways into making the national conference a whole lot more affordable. And I will say, Julia, Chris, you guys were talking about networking. If you want to network in NATS and in the voice teaching community, one of the best ways you can do it is by attending the national conference. I mean, y'all have the advantage you're in New York, so there are a few more voice teachers per capita in your city than there are in mine. Nevertheless, if you really want to get some great mentorship, some great connections, and get some great information, you don't have to serve the whole time. We want you to go to sessions, but it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's see. I just want to make sure of our time. I have a few questions here. We talked about that. So let's talk a little bit about funding. That was another thing that came up quite a bit in the Google form. We have all these great ideas. We want to do all these projects for the students, but we have to pay for it, right? And we're all trying to set the precedent where, yes, volunteerism is good. Yes, doing things for service is good. But a lot of the working professionals out there that aren't connected to academia, service is not really necessarily part of their business plan. So we need funds for that. So I thought maybe, Justin, could you talk a little about your role in advising, and then Julia and Chris, your role as students in securing some university funding and other things you do to fund your activities?
Yeah, I think we're still in the early stages of this. The one thing I do want to say, because I know it can be a little bit discouraging, perhaps, for those institutions out there that are maybe smaller than NYU. I don't have some of the resource that we have in place, and not every institution offers funding for these types of endeavors. So I think it's really important, of course, to be paying people for their time and doing these things. Just know that there are many creative ways by which to go about this. Of course, within the world of academia, we have this idea of service, but I would venture to say we've had a lot of wonderful people just be so gracious, to share their time, just in terms of saying to folks, "Hey, this is what we do. If you would be interested in coming to talk with us or to share a little bit of your time, we would be very grateful for that." And then as we've been able to grow and show a record, if you will, of what we've been able to accomplish, then we're able to put that forward to the institution to say, "Hey, this is what we've been doing. This is why we need support." I think early on, it takes a little bit of innovation and creativity. And once you've checked those boxes and you've been able to show a bit of a record of I don't want to say excellence, but bringing people in and really executing to a certain degree, then funders, backers are able to get behind you, if you will. In our case, the graduate student organization, which has been very helpful and has allowed us to do things that perhaps we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. I just say that because I've taught at institutions that are smaller in nature, right? And so I know that the resources are different. And I would also say that you'd be surprised, sometimes larger organizations are not better off in terms of funding. Surprise, surprise, sometimes it's more difficult to get funding in these scenarios, also too more competitive when you're up against more organizations. But I think it's about really being creative early on, and exploring all avenues, all possibilities, all pathways of funding. Sometimes, that's discretionary funding from the deans, or that's discretionary funding from department chairs. And you'd be surprised, where there's a little bit of money here or there that may be able to be reallocated even mid-year, before the fiscal year ends, if something wasn't, used for something else. In our case this year, because of COVID, we weren't able to have a mixer early on, and we had a little bit of extra money. So what we're doing is SNATS is sponsoring some tables and refreshments outside of the jury rooms this year for 2 days. And there are going to be like fruit and cereal bars and all different types of things for students to get. And we're going to have a QR code and some handouts on SNATS, a couple friendly faces like Julia and Chris to be like, "Hey, great job in your jury. Here, take a snack and learn a little bit more about SNATS, your evening reading on your nightstand." So it's just about, being creative and exploring those avenues, because there's a lot of possibilities out there. I think even for those who think, "Oh my gosh, we don't have the resource," it's about being innovators, as we do in the arts.
Absolutely. Chris, Julia, do you want to speak to any of that as well?
Yeah, I think Dr. Moniz brought up a great point just in terms of creativity. I think creativity in terms of funding, but also creativity if you're just wanting to get your SNATS chapter started, and you don't have funding yet. We really had to get creative. I remember in that first year, when I was just going as the music events coordinator, and what are we going to do? How are we going to get involvement? And I think one of the most well-attended events we had that semester, we hosted a SNATS social hour, which was on Zoom. And we were really nervous about it because we were like, who wants to sit on Zoom anymore right now than all the time we're sitting in a classroom on a Zoom? But we had a really well-attended, two of our professors, Professor Jamie Maple and Devin Meddock, came in and sat for, I think, 2 or 2.5 hours, Julia, and just
wild
talked with the students who showed up that day, and just answered any questions about pedagogy, about performance, about how they got their jobs at NYU, what the process was like when they graduated from their graduate degrees. And it was so wonderful, and it got so many people interested in the chapter, and it cost us nothing, which was amazing. And it was because they were willing to volunteer their time. And so I think while it may seem overwhelming, there are ways to, like Dr. Moniz said, get creative and get involvement early on so that you're able to show that you're making things happen in order to get that funding, hopefully down the line from your university.
Yeah, I would just say that. Sorry.
Didn't y'all build that as like a SNATS happy hour? Like, come grab a
coffee. we changed it to social hour because we didn't want to encourage drinking for undergraduates who might attend. But yes, happy hour is what we wanted to go.
Again, it's all in the marketing. I mean, it was something so simple, but with the images and the neons, and it was like, oh, this looks really cool. And I'm thinking, who's going to want to go after 12 hours on Zoom, rehearsals and everything? Who's going to want it Friday night to sit? I was shocked with the people that showed up. I think it has to do with those posters. I'm saying.
Well, I think we did. Julia, I think, actually made had Professor Maple and Professor Meddock submit their cocktail or a mocktail of choice for the evening and what the ingredients were for those drinks, so that way students could make them if they wanted to, and they attended. It was really cute.
Yeah, I would say that it was great. Also, just like, as I think that event was really awesome as a teacher, just to be able to go in and ask questions that we wanted to talk about. But I think really starting out, one thing we realized is we don't have to think big. We don't have to think too big. Start with what you have. And we thought about doing events where we just let it as an e-board, where we had an open, if we wanted to have like a coffee hour chat, which we used to do with Dr. Moniz and PED, we can do that. So starting kind of small there helps. And I don't think you need to be, you have, no matter what, these university, these music programs, you have great faculty and students already to use. So I think taking advantage of that is the first place to start, not thinking that you have to go get a Broadway star or a Met star to do it. Because you don't. You have great resources right there. So I think there was where we started, and I think it makes our brand special too.
I love that. It seems like with students, with events, with funding, a lot of it is like, if you build it, they will come, right? You have to start with what you have, and then success begets more success, and that's fantastic. Nick, there are some funding options from NATS as well. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we have SNATS grants, which a chapter can get once per fiscal year, and on the NATS fiscal year is January 1 to December 31, in the amount of $200, which in today's terms I realize is not much, but one of the things, and it's not meant to be necessarily a primary funding source. However, going back to something Justin was sharing about the idea of possibly getting some discretionary funds from a dean or a chair or something, a lot of the time your dean is more willing to do so if he, she, whoever, knows that you have funding source from somewhere else as matching funds. As a lot of grants prefer you to have matching funds in general. So it could be just another little piece of a fundraising puzzle, but a chapter is eligible for those once per fiscal year.
That's a great opportunity as well, Nick. We're all practicing. We're gonna have to secure funding for events. We're all practicing writing grants. We all need to build that skill as well. And so, if you can build that into the SNATS experience, secure a little bit of extra funding from NATS, practice that skill, put a line on your CV where you're attaining grants for your student organization. That can be really helpful too. So it's beyond just the immediate practical impact, right? There's other impacts from that as well. Oh gosh, there are so many other things I wanted to ask all of you, but I think our conversation has really covered a lot, and we touched on the major requests from our registrants who filled out our Google form. So I'd love to open up, if there are anyone who's attending who has any questions about for us to elaborate on anything we've talked about, something that you hoped we would cover that we didn't. While you're thinking about that, if you want to put that in the Q&A or the chat, while you're thinking about that, I'll just remind us one more time to thank I want to thank our sponsor, Ruth Ellis, and her program, the Vocal Instructor Academy. Thank you, Ruth. I also want to say that any of you, if you're watching this either live or if you're watching the recording, which will be posted on YouTube later, if you have friends, colleagues, students who are thinking about starting a SNATS chapter, point them to this video. It will be archived, and this conversation could be a real conversation starter for the students at your university or in your community who are looking to start a chapter. Come back to this recording, think about how to schedule these events, how to structure the chapter, all kinds of fun things that that hopefully this conversation will start more conversations out there. One other thing I want to encourage you all to do if you're watching this is we are always looking for topics to cover in these SNATS chats. So if you are a current college student, or if you are an early career voice teacher, or you're a member of a SNATS chapter not affiliated with the university, you know, if you have a topic that you would love to have us cover, please send them to me directly. You can reach me at my first name dot last name at nyu.edu, ERRIK, because my parents just knew from birth I would want attention, so that's the way my name is spelled. But you can email me directly and let us know what topics you'd like to have covered. Oh, we have a question. Ian, for new chapters or chapters looking to expand, is there a repository of best practices and lessons learned across all chapters? Nick, do you know if that exists?
I would say that the repository does not exist in a formal sense. I would say that the best thing to do would be to reach out to the last couple of VPs for outreach, who are the SNATS coordinators, or myself, and I can certainly do that investigation for you. But that would probably be the first thing that comes to mind. I don't think there is a... You know, one of the things I think it's important to consider with SNATS is that because every university looks different, I think a lot of SNATS chapters look different. And I think that that's okay. Like, I love what y'all have done at NYU. I think it's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant. But I don't know that SNATS just needs to be about what event can we have. SNATS can be a much broader idea than that, and I think different chapters, like for example, one of the things that I had actually proposed in my application to be VP for Outreach was the idea of applying for just some discretionary funds, if you can also find some other funds, to, as a SNATS chapter, go to make a relationship with a local YMCA and offer some free voice lessons to some at-risk or low-income students. Or a high school where you know that, or middle school where you know that they're not getting that, where there is a need. You know, it doesn't just have to be about what can we provide to our students. It can also be about what can we as a chapter do for our community. And so, but in terms of best practices, how to make a SNATS chapter, how to have policies, any kind of thing like that, there is no like official document of here are the bylaws that you need to sign just to be a SNATS chapter, NYU style or whatever style. I mean, you know, I'm just picking on NYU because they're here. But you know, so but we can certainly find out the history on that if it would like to be known.
Yeah, Nick, that's great. And, you know, Ian, that's something, Nick, if it's helpful, you know, having worked with Allison and Kimberly and hoping to continue to work with you, that's something I'd be happy to work on with you. We could do that. And Ian, I know you have tons of spare time, but Ian, please, I would love your collaboration too. So if you have some ideas, send them our way. That would be fantastic. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions right now. I just want to thank Nick, Julia, Chris, and Justin again. It's wonderful to speak with you and to bounce these ideas off of one another. And just like Nick said, this is the model that has worked for NYU. And I can say, as someone who teaches there and interacts with these students, it works very well, right? These students are doing a fantastic job. Justin is doing an incredible job as the advisor, and it's a real pleasure to watch. And like Nick was saying, though, this exact model might not work for your university, right? Or your community if you're starting a SNATS chapter in a community. But hopefully this model of how it got started, bringing together interested students, polling those students for what's important to them, starting with the resources you have and building out from that, being creative with funding and programming, looking for ways to maybe reach out into the community, using that as the seed for your SNATS chapter that will work for your university, your community. I hope that's what you can take away from this, and you just get to see the way it manifested at NYU specifically with these fantastic folks. So before we wrap up, Nick, Julia, Chris, Justin, any parting words you'd like to offer before we finish up?
Can I just jump in and say one more thing?
Please.
As an idea for a SNATS chapter. So if there's anybody out there who watching, I would love it to see SNATS chapters organize watch parties for these SNATS chats. So like get together, throw it on a big screen, somebody has a projector, or a room somewhere where that has a projector. Connect to your Wi-Fi, throw it up on a screen, get some snacks, happy hour, whatever you all did, or whatever you didn't call it, happy hour, whatever you called it, and watch one of these SNATS chats, and then maybe have either the advisor or somebody else, like for example, if it's on some kind of topic, like pedagogic topic or something else, somebody who could help facilitate a conversation, provide some further expertise about maybe it leads somewhere else. That's just one idea, but I just wanted to throw that out there as a last thing. I was thinking, it was in the back of my head, since we're on one of these SNATS chats and we'll be thinking about these moving forward. That's another, or the regular NATS chats. Host a watch party for those. It could be in somebody's apartment. It doesn't even have to be somewhere fancy. Anyway, that's it. Thank you, and thank you for having me.
No, Nick, it's been great to have you, and I agree with you completely, and not just for the selfish reason of we want more people to watch these chats, but I think it can be a great way to, like I just said, this can be the start of a conversation that you can continue in your chapters in ways that really make sense for your group members. Maybe we glossed over something a little more quickly that you really want to explore, or maybe we explored something in depth, but you want to apply that more directly to what you're doing specifically. So, Nick, I think that's a great way to use these conversations on our SNATS chats as conversation starters for an impetus for something more and more specific for your group. So I love that suggestion. Thank you, Nick. Julia, Chris, Justin, any parting words? Julia?
Yeah, I'll just say thank you so much for having me. This is great to kind of brainstorm myself, being like, what worked? What can we improve on? But I guess I'll just say one thing that Chris and I have talked about. As much as, our society has a lot of social media and a lot of internet presence, the best way for things to happen is word of mouth. And it still is. And so talking about it is the way that we get people interested, and the way that we really know the needs that our community has. So I would just say really word of mouth, and always talking about it can be helpful, even to anybody in the part of your community. So.
Fantastic. Chris, Justin?
I think Julia kind of hit the nail on the head there with that. I think just doing your best to reach out to anyone at your university, your community, and ask what they feel like they have a need for at that time. I think that's at the end of the day what we're here for. Creating a community and a family of singers and voice teachers at our different schools, and providing them with the best things that we can possibly provide them, so that they feel like they've left their time at the school obtaining everything that they wanted to obtain. And if we're able to be a part of that puzzle for them, then I feel like we've succeeded in our jobs on the executive board. And also just thank you for having us. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
It's my pleasure. And that's one of the reasons why we do these chats. One of the reasons why I think everyone in this room is such a supporter of SNATS generally is because you leave the university setting, you decided you wanted to start teaching voice, and it can feel very lonely and scary and overwhelming. But building that community during your college experience and having that network to lean on, bounce ideas off of, ask questions, you start that environment, that collaborative mindset all the way back in university or in your community, and you can continue as you emerge as a new career voice teacher. So that's fantastic. Justin, any final words you want to offer?
No words.
Okay, great.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure to share a little bit about what we've been doing. I wish everybody the best, and also to encourage folks to reach out. We have a really wonderful group of folks here at NYU. I know there are many other institutions who are doing this with great success. So there are resources out there, and I think you just reach out to folks and just say, hey, how's that working? And I'm happy to be a resource and to forward on emails to any of the NYU e-board if there's further questions for any of this.
Yeah, Excellent. And oh, I should say maybe I got the opportunity to teach a master class for our SNATS chapter combined with a SNATS chapter at another university. So one of the nice things about this interconnected virtual space that we've been living in these past few years is that we can do these kinds of collaborative classes. So we had a dear friend and colleague of mine, Olga Flora, and I taught a master class for NYU students and their institution, and we did it via Zoom. And I worked with their students, and she worked with NYU students, and that's another way you can build your network by connecting with other chapters. So I would encourage you, if you're thinking about that, maybe the folks at NYU or maybe nearby schools where you are might be interested in combining resources and doing joint events. So that might be something to explore as well. So, okay, well, thank you all very much. Wonderful to speak with you all, those who are watching live and also who might be watching the recording later. Feel free to reach out to any of us. We're happy to help you build an active and successful SNATS chapter at your university or community. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night. Thanks very much.